What happens if the home inspection shows a lot of problems? What happens if the appraisal comes back low? Does that mean the deal automatically falls apart? Not necessarily. I'm going to walk you through the most stressful part of the whole home buying process, and I'm going to explain to you what really happens. Now, many buyers will come up to me and ask me, what happens if my home inspection fails? And really, with home inspections, there isn't really a pass or fail because there's not like you have to have these items in perfect condition in order to process. It's more of a situation where it lets you know everything that is wrong with the house. And I'll tell you, the home inspector, he's very thorough with this because what he does is he goes through everything. Appliances that stay, he runs them. If a door opens and it creaks, or if it shuts quickly or opens quickly, he's going to notate that on the report. If squirrels have went up and ate your little boots on your roof, he's going to actually tell you that. So you're going to see a lot of things on the report and you're going to think, oh my gosh, that's a lot of stuff. But you have to look at it objectively. Now, another common inspection is a WDO inspection, which is wood destroying organism. And that is actually more of a pass or fail because you either have a clean WDO or you have a dirty one. And a WDO will look for termites or carpenter ants or wood rot, softwood. And let's go back to termites for a second. We're in Florida, termites are here. So properties are either going to have termites in the future, have already had termites, or currently have had termites. So if you notice any types of in the wood where you see like little paths, little tunnels, that is typically a termite situation. Now, whether they're still there or not, you got to look a little bit farther, a little bit deeper to see if they're still there. But it's not something that you should completely be scared of if it's been treated. Now, the appraiser is going to come through in certain loans like FHA. While they may not say, hey, you have to have a clean WDO, if the appraiser puts on their report that there's wood rot or soft wood, anything related to that, then the lender is going to come back and say, yes, we should have a clean WDO done. And oftentimes, not every time, I don't want to tell you every single time, if a seller is offering a house via FHA that they're allowing FHA buyers to come and make offers, they usually are pretty good about making those repairs because if it gets called, they can't go any farther, they can't close. And if they continue to offer FHA financing, they still have to have those repairs done to go further and get this house closed. All right, now I'm going to talk about what happens if you don't have a clean WDO. What happens if the home inspection has a lot of items and they're making you nervous? Well, here's what can be typical. You can walk away if you're within that 10-day period and you will receive your binder back. You can ask for repairs and the seller can also say no. If we're doing an as-is contract, and sometimes the listing agent and the seller will ask for us to write it on an as-is contract, that does not mean that we can't still ask for repairs. If you have a FHA or a VA loan, they're going to be a little more strict on what needs to be fixed. Not necessarily harder as far as like appraisal coming in low, but just they have certain requirements that the property needs to meet. Usually it's like a safety or a sanitary type thing. No holes in the wall, things of that nature. If the appraiser says, hey, there's wood rot, then they're going to require the wood rot to be fixed. So even though FHA is typically like, hey, you don't have to have a clean WDO, chances are pretty good that the appraiser is going to call for that and you're going to have it done. So we just go in and we ask. And usually most sellers are really good. So the last thing about home inspections, it shouldn't be a surprise, really, because you know how old the roof is or the HVAC system. If it's cooling, it's matching the temperature it's set on, then it's usually a good sign. Now, there are some things that may not be a good sign that you may not have noticed if there's some leaks. Like I remember, okay, story time. I remember one house, the inspector actually caught this little tiny like spot on the ceiling, and it was actually under the bathroom. It was so tiny, and it ended up being a slight leak, and it was just very slight. It's very small. That's not something you're going to notice. So had the inspector not catch that, that could have been ended up being a problem down the road. Another thing, septic inspections. If it's on a septic tank and you have that inspection done, you may not know that there's a crack. And I had this happen. There was a crack. And really, the owner didn't know either because it wasn't puddling up and smelling. And he didn't know. And the inspection caught it. So that was a great catch that would also cause a lot of money down the road to get fixed too. Now, during this time, you're going to hear me talk about due diligence and what you want to do during your due diligence. And I did mention this before in my other first time home buyer series, so you may already know what I'm talking about if you did watch those. But due diligence is everything that is important to you about the house you want to find out. So, like, I always bring up homeowners insurance because I know you've heard the headlines about it being very expensive in Florida, and it has gone up tremendously. So you don't want that to be a shock, a week before closing, and it's too much and you don't want to pay that. So you want to find out with that particular house how much it's going to cost you so you know. So if it comes back and it's way too much, then you have that chance to be able to back out and receive your binder again. Okay, so new construction homes. A lot of times people don't think about buying a home inspection and having that done because it's brand new. So you think brand new, it's perfect, there's no issues. But remember, it's humans building those houses, and humans, we do make mistakes. So if you're building from scratch, from the ground up, or maybe it's a builder who does start from the ground up and you can't really make changes, but they have just started, you can have a home inspector come in and they can do inspections before drywall is put up. See what's behind the walls. After drywall is done and the electrical and things like that are put in and they're on and you can see, you can do a finished home inspection. Or let's say you're buying a spec home, which is also called an inventory home, ready to go. You can have a full-fledged home inspection done and you can see if there's any issues. One time I had a lender tell me that the buyer did not do an inspection, not my buyer, and it ended up having no installation in the second floor, and it was really, really hot up there. So they had to put installation in after the fact. So if you are buying new construction, you may want to consider having a home inspection done. Okay, so this next part is about appraisals. What happens if the appraisal comes in low? Now, let me tell you a little bit about an appraisal without making you drool from boredom. The appraiser is going to come take a look at the house. They're going to measure, they're going to take pictures of the house. Hopefully, the listing agent has done their job and has included all the upgrades. They're going to find out the size of the home, visually look at the upgrades as well, and they're going to pull up 3 comps that have sold within the past 6 months. If the market is really, really hot, they may even just look at 3 months, but 6 months, they try to keep it as the longest. Also, 3 comps that are like either active or under contract. They try to pull houses that are similar in size, upgrades, neighborhood. They try not to go out of the neighborhood. Sometimes if you're in the rural areas, it might be a little more difficult if it's not in an actual neighborhood and it's unique. But They try to stay within a mile of the neighborhood. If there's enough comps to pull in that neighborhood, they don't really need to go out. Now, I'm going to talk about story time in my own neighborhood that I live in. Here's a situation where the, the, this house I saw sold, and it sold for an excessive amount, way above any comparables that have ever sold in my neighborhood. I was shocked. And not only did it sell and close, it appraised for that. There is no way that house should appraised for the amount. And I'm trying to be a little vague, just to keep it vague. But that buyer who bought that house is not going to recoup that. And the appraiser had to go outside of the neighborhood. And there is a newer neighborhood across the street, and it should never be used as comparables because it's newer. It's 30 years newer. I think it's built out completely, but it's only a few years old, if that. That is a situation that probably should have never happened. Most appraisers would not do that. I had a listing that the demand from buyers was huge. We had multiple offers. The house was gorgeous. They kept it up well. The neighborhood did not reflect their price. So ultimately, we had a VA buyer, and the appraisal came back low, and they did what's called a tidewater. That was the first time I'd ever heard of that. But it gives the listing agent the opportunity to plead our case, to prove that our price is justified. I went out to another neighborhood that would justify it, but it was about 2 or so miles away, and it was a little older. I could not, get them to agree to the list price or the purchase price. So the sellers did end up having to come down on their price. Unfortunately, that was a situation where buyer demand met that purchase price, but the appraisal didn't. So if you do have this situation where the appraisal comes back low, there's a couple things that can happen. That is a contingency in the contract. So even if you're out of your due diligence, it's okay if you decide you want to walk away. Most buyers, they only decide that if the seller doesn't agree to come down, and the buyers don't have money to bring to closing to meet that gap. But usually, most of the time, the sellers are willing to come down on their price, unless it's really obvious that there's something wrong and the appraiser made a mistake. We're all human. It happens. So those are your options with the appraisal. Move on, bring money to closing, or the seller comes down. If you move on, you will get your binder back because it's falling under that contingency. Okay, so if you're thinking about buying a house in Northeast Florida, you want some more information, check out my playlist where I go over the first-time home buyer process. And even if you're not a first-time home buyer, it's still a good refresher because things are different. It changes often. Areas are different. Or you can leave me a comment and I'll be happy to send you the link.